Welcome to this episode of Criminology Chats. I'm JR.
And I'm Miranda.
Today, Miranda and I will be chatting with Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood. He is a theologian and spiritual advisor to death row inmates nationwide. He has accompanied 11 men to their executions, including the 1st and 8th nitrogen hypoxia executions. It was tough for me to even say that.
In the media, he is recognized as the leading spiritual voice on the death penalty, and his work has been profiled widely, including in a Rolling Stone documentary, The Spiritual Advisor. For both his service and scholarship, he was nominated for the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. Currently, Dr. Hood serves on the board of Advisors of Death Penalty Action, the most consequential national grassroots protest organization dedicated specifically to abolishing the death penalty.
In our conversation with Dr. Hood, he mentioned several inmates on death row. The focus of our show today, though, is the death penalty, not on the death row inmates that he may mention during the show. Also, Dr. Hood describes in detail what he has seen at several of the executions he has attended in the past. Listener discretion is advised.
I've gotten to a point where, there's so much going out. I just try not to say anything stupid anywhere.
Yeah, that's me too. But as I get older, sometimes my filters are starting to fall away.
That's what I think. Anyway. So just don't say anything dumb and you'll be all right.
All right.
Is it because of societal norms of femininity and nurturing personalities and having worse punishments being on death row than men? Or do you think it's just because there's nowhere to put them since there's just so few women on death row?
This is a fascinating question. And the reason it's a fascinating question is because it goes in so many different directions.
See, I told you she'd have better questions than me.
First of all, the death penalty is the ultimate reverse sexism type space, meaning you are far more likely to get the death penalty if you are a man than if you're a woman, which you have these societal norms. Very difficult to get a jury to think that a woman is capable of extreme horror and extreme crimes, capital murder. On the other hand, once someone is convicted, there's a belief that there is no femininity in this person anymore, that this person is no longer a woman, and so they have to be treated as an animal. I think there's a quicker road to dehumanization for women on death row than there is for men, because I think there's such a contrast for people, and I think that if a woman is sentenced to death row, there's a belief that, oh my God, she must be worse than all of these men because women aren't usually sentenced to death row. It's a multifaceted sort of way of looking at it. On the other hand, I've struggled very much with words to describe these crimes because some of them are so horrible. But I think that the aftermath of the crime that makes it so shocking, putting someone in a deep freezer, driving them across the country, trying to bury that deep freezer. I mean, I think a jury is going to sit there and look at this and think, God, maybe I was driving down the highway with my kids and they passed by with that deep freezer. And, I think there's this connection to this crime. And the reality is that there are people who do far worse things throughout the country that are not given the death penalty. And so it's not just that this dehumanization and feminization are mixing together to make this situation horrible. And I think that just presents an unbelievable question as to how we engage questions of gender, how we engage questions of punishment, and how we engage of, who we want to be as a society. Do we want to assume all of these things about women, the disease of patriarchy and misogyny and all of these various is and isms that come to play here.
And if the male inmates on death row get this, then we have to give her that. We have to treat them all the same unless they show that they can't be treated the same and there are a disciplinary problem. The DOC could take action.
Do you think it would help if there was one prison system where women on death row got sent to so they could experience death row like men do, where it's more community, more people in there in the day room instead of in isolation constantly?
Sure. Tricky question. In Texas, for instance, they have 8, 9 women on death row there in Texas, and they are very much a community. They have a garden and they have activities that they do together. And there's a think it was in the New York Times, but there's a really interesting article about nuns that have been working on death row with women on death row in Texas. And there is this real, like I said, deep community and deep connection.
A lot of times I find that in the Southeast, and I'm from the Southeast, for the Bible Belt, a lot of folks there, when it comes to the death penalty, are mixed in what they believe in as far as the death penalty, but a lot of them refer to scriptures advocating against the death penalty and advocating for it. Tell us how you became involved in what you're doing now in advocating against the death penalty.
Well, I think there's a lot of ways to answer this question. I often have interactions with people and they say, well, the Bible says this and the Bible says that. And I'm constantly brought to this position of just saying, well, who gives a fuck? And what I mean by that is if it's not loving, if it's not just, if it's not merciful, then I really don't give a fuck like what you say that the Bible says. Because to me, the message of Jesus is about loving your neighbor as yourself. And you can't love your neighbor as you love yourself and kill your neighbor. You can't love your neighbor and torture them for decades. I mean, we're supposed to love our neighbor on death row just as much as we love our neighbor next door. If we're not going to kill our neighbor next door, then we don't need to be killing our neighbor on death row. And so I think for me, these theological arguments about the death penalty are exhausting. I'm more than happy to have them and more than happy to, go to toe with the best of them. But it seems very basic to me. I always say, can you imagine Jesus going into an execution chamber and executing someone? I mean, give me a break. If you can imagine a Jesus or a God like that, then, I mean, your mind is quite warped and you have no idea of what, mercy and grace even is. With that said, I've been doing this work for about 15, 16 years now. And, I've been very, very influenced by this idea that my faith pulls me to the least of these, those who are struggling the most. In the Gospel of Matthew 25, it says, what you've done to the least of these, you've done to me. So in my estimation, those who we treat the worst are the people that we should treat the best. Those who are most ostracized are the persons that we should be most inclusive of. And so, the scripture is not only saying that we are to treat the marginalized and the oppressed as the most, or to bring them to the forefront. It also says that that's where you will find the message of Jesus. That's where you will find Christ. And so, interestingly enough, and there were a lot of people that would really get mad at me using this phrasing, but I almost feel like with my work, I'm sort of an evangelist of love, an evangelist of hope that, hey, look, if there's humanity here on death row, then certainly we can find humanity with the folks that we encounter on a daily basis. If we can get to a point where we're morally developed enough, morally evolved to not strap people down to a gurney and kill them, then perhaps when it comes to Alex Preddy and Renee Good, we won't have, I guess, such comfort with people getting killed in our streets. So I guess I see the death penalty as a real meta issue, a real meta moment for society. I think it speaks to who we are. It reminds me, Thomas Merton, great Catholic mystic in the 1960s and 70s. He said the modern man, of course, man and woman, since we're trying to be inclusive on this conversation, man and woman, the modern person is walking around with a gun in their hand, and the only question is whether they will shoot themselves or someone else first. And I think that speaks to who we are as a society. I did a press conference in November for Luigi Mangione and whether or not he should get the death penalty. And it's fascinating how you go to a place like Manhattan and, New York State hasn't killed anybody since, I think it was 1964. And yet, when you talk about the death penalty, you still meet a lot of people who thinks that this person deserves to die. And what I feel like I've realized about the death penalty throughout the years is that it's not about killing someone. To bring this conversation full circle, it's not about killing someone as much as it's about what we fear. And so we fear Luigi Mangione because we're scared that somehow this person is going to disrupt the power structure in our nation, that somehow this person is going to disrupt, the healthcare industry, that somehow all of a sudden assassins are going to come out of, the sewers, if you will, and, start killing all of their political enemies. The death penalty has nothing to do with punishing these folks. It's got everything to do with our fear. And the scriptures very clearly say that there is no fear in love, that perfect love pushes out fear, that they are more than the things that disturb them and the things that they're afraid of. So in many ways, I see these folks on death row as sort of a gateway to a broader moral awakening and a broader spiritual awakening in our society. So I guess to make a long story short, as I've done this work, I certainly do it for these folks on death row, but I also do it so that they might be able to speak to the wider populace about grace and about mercy and about love. I'll also say that in 2022, in the Ramirez versus Collier decision, that was the decision that allowed for spiritual advisors to be in the execution chamber with folks who are being executed. So that sort of changed everything for spiritual advisors. It created a space where it wasn't just that you were going in and, having conversations and giving sermons and whatnot in prisons. It created a situation where the spiritual advisor is the person who is the closest witness to the execution, which sort of changes everything, because it's not just that you're providing comfort to the person who's being executed. You also have a responsibility to speak to what is happening and what has happened in that space. And so the first guy that I was with in the execution chamber was Scott Eisenberg. Scott was a guy who brutally killed an elderly couple in Oklahoma and escaped, and they couldn't find him for months, and he was on America's Most Wanted. He was one of these sort of celebrity criminals, if you will. And we were together. It was incredibly disturbing to literally watch someone who's perfectly well have their life extinguished right in front of you. I've done it 11 times. There's nothing that can prepare you for that. And probably the most horrific, definitely the most horrific, a lethal injection, the horror is in the nonchalantness of it all, in that, it's just sort of a process. There's a paralytic that hits. This person, looks like they're going unconscious. There's been an argument as to how unconscious they actually are, but it looks like a medical procedure. It looks like someone is going in to have surgery and getting anesthetized. So I've seen 9 of those, but I've also seen 2 nitrogen executions. There's been 8 total, 7 in Alabama and 1 in Louisiana. And it presents a whole nother level of insanity. You can Google all sorts of descriptions I've given of these nitrogen executions. But this past October, Anthony Boyd, who was executed October the 23rd there in Alabama. The way a nitrogen execution works is the mask goes from the top of the hairline underneath the chin, and it has a glass plate on the front. Then there's a tube that connects it to a nitrogen canister, and then the process begins. Anthony, when the nitrogen hit, I'm right next to him when this happens. His eyes start bulging out. He begins to heave back and forth and back and forth. He begins to spit, and blood, saliva, mucus coming out inside the mask. So what's happening is all of that fluid is catching on the inside of the mask, and so it's drizzling down. It looks like a waterfall of body fluid, and his entire body is tensed. He's got, veins going, pulsating in every direction, muscles tense, and, he's screaming at me. Like, he's trying to say something, and this goes on for 19 minutes. We're not talking about a short amount of time. We're talking about, with Kenny Smith, the first one, I was with him, his was 8 minutes, and this one was 19 minutes. There's a level of trauma that is taking place in every execution, but there's a level of trauma with these nitrogen executions that is just, strange and torturous and almost, I guess the best way of saying it is there's a level of moral injury that one feels when you're standing there and your job, is to be there for the person, and you see them struggling like that and being tortured like that, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. The nightmares, the things that keep me awake at night are the images of these guys, looking at me and saying, "Jeff, why didn't you help me? You were the only one that could have possibly stopped this. Why didn't you help me?" And the answer, of course, to that is quite simple. I mean, I wouldn't be able to stop it. I wouldn't, I'd go to prison, blah, 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 on and on. But again, that moral injury of thinking, what if I could help, or why didn't I try, or, those sorts of things. And so it's difficult work. It's something that I never thought I would be doing. I didn't go to seminary thinking that my primary work would be with people on death row, but I also find it to be quite beautiful as well. To be able to find love in such horrific circumstances, I think teaches us that it is possible for love to push through the most horrific of circumstances. And I think that's a tremendous blessing to be able to witness that. So I guess as much as there's the horror, as much as there's the curse, there's also the blessing and there's also love.
Do you think the media and how much violence is on media makes people desensitized to the violence, even knowing that people are being put through this when they are sentenced to death?
Yeah, sure. I think that people don't care to a degree. Now, Miranda, I will tell you this. If we created a system where jurors and judges that sentence people to death actually had to carry the sentence out, there would be no death penalty. I mean, if we made the entire state sit down and watch these executions on closed-circuit television, there would be no death penalty. I mean, the reason the death penalty continues is the distance between the average citizen and the execution chamber. And I think that also speaks to your point. In terms of being desensitized to violence, there's a distance there, right? I mean, when you're watching it, when you're watching it on television, there's a distance. I think that part of my job as a spiritual advisor to these folks, but also as the closest witness to the execution, is to bring people close, to actually describe what these things look like and, how these things function. Because I think that when people are brought close, they're a lot less interested in executing people.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll even say even the closest folks, you look at corrections officers, I think it's the last 3 wardens, the last 3 executioners in Ohio have all come out in opposition to the death penalty. And you see that a lot. Ron McAndrew, who's in Florida, he presided over the last electric chair execution in Florida in the 90s, and he has become this huge opponent of the death penalty, and not because it necessarily is based on the person who's being executed as much as the horror that it inflicts on everyone who has to participate. One of the things, Miranda, I will say that I say a lot, I think arguments against the death penalty, or even conversations about the death penalty, being focused on the offender are really problematic, because ultimately you're always going to be able to produce, a Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy. You're always going to produce someone that makes your skin crawl.
Yeah.
But the question is not about these offenders as much as it is about us. Who do we want to be? Do we want the state to murder people in our name? Do we want to be murderers as citizens of these states? And the closer people get to these executions, the more they realize they're implicated in these executions. And the closer we can draw people to implication, I think the more we are able to actually have a clear picture of what's actually going on and what's actually happening. But as long as these executions are taking place in the middle of the night in a small town most of the time, out of the vision and witness of the wider populace, there are always going to be people who are willing to get paid enough money to do this. I think as sick and as sad as that is, I think that's always going to be the case. In most states, most executioners, there's a lot of people who say, well, they're just doing their job. It's a really silly argument. And the reason that's a silly argument is because I think I read somewhere recently that there's only one execution team in America that is not a volunteer execution team. So every group of executioners that I encounter are volunteers. And so these are people who are deciding to do this. Now, there's a lot of people who get mad at me for talking like this because they think I'm supposed to be caring and loving and compassionate when it comes to these corrections officers too. And I am to a degree.
Yeah.
But again, when you choose to kill people, that's fucked up. Regardless of whether you're sitting at home and you're a citizen of the state or you're an employee of the Department of Corrections and you're there, when you decide to kill people, that is fucked up.
Yeah.
Yep.
The part I left out, and I want to make clear, I am also very determined to tell the truth about all the people that I work with. I got some folks that are damn near terrifying that I would never, ever, ever want to encounter outside of the prison, ever. But that doesn't mean that I think that they should be murdered. I'll tell you a quick story. And I think your listeners, they will appreciate the horror of it. One of my guys in Texas was a serial molester of children, serial killer of children. And I am very determined, for the most part, to not look at these cases before I interact with people, because I feel like that puts me in a weird juxtaposition in being able to them. And so I'm very determined to just meet them where they are. But this was sort of the second or third time that I had interacted with this particular guy. And we go through the conversation, and, I think we were there for 2 hours, and, lots of love and laughs and, him talking about different things. And we get to the end of the conversation, and I said, is there anything more that I can do for you? How can I help you? What can I do? And he looks at me and he says, can you send me a picture of your children? And I remember in that moment thinking, here I have spent like 2 hours thinking we're making progress and thinking we're getting to a good place. And then, he wants a picture of my kids. I kind of sat there with him, and he just started talking as if that comment didn't happen. And I was so shocked that I didn't really know what to say. But I look back at that moment, and I'm able to say, I don't think that this person should ever leave the walls of a prison.
Yeah.
I am not one of these prison abolitionist types. I do not feel like that. I think that there are clearly people who, for whatever reason, are determined to hurt people. But at the same time, there are also people who got dealt a bad hand and are actually quite lovely people.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm getting at is that you can't talk about the death penalty without telling the truth from all sides. Whether you're talking about from the side of the offender, the side of the corrections officers, the sides of families, people who are working with these folks, victims' families. Somebody told me the other day, they said the victim's family is really pushing hard for him to be executed. And I had somebody tell me the other day, can you believe they're doing that? And I said, no, of course I can. Yeah, I can certainly believe that they're doing it, because if somebody had raped and murdered my daughter, I would be doing the exact same damn thing. It's not like... I think that we have to tell the truth. What would we desire? Just because we desire something doesn't mean that it's our best. It just means that's what we desire. I think that it's also a question of, I've said this a couple of times, but who do we want to be? It's not a question of what do you want to do? How do you want to react? What would you do? How would you feel? It's a question of how do we want to be? Do we want to be killers, or do we want to be people who try to stop killing? Do we want to teach our young people to kill or be killed? Or do we want to teach them that you can stop killing by stopping killing?
Yeah. I agree with you too, though. There are some folks that probably don't ever need to come out of the institution just because they want to hurt people and they're going to hurt people again. But that doesn't necessarily mean we need to put them to death. It's a lot more punishment if they're there for the rest of their life, knowing they're never getting out and have to deal with all that it encompasses of being in there.
Right. It's interesting. Miranda, you were talking about the distance between people and violence, or people and executions. The other thing you got to think about is, we're couple months past Richard Jordan being executed in Mississippi, and it was 50 years between the sentence and it actually being carried out. You're talking about most of the victim's family no longer being around. So if you're talking about vengeance, then that doesn't make sense. If you're talking about punishment, he's almost 80 years old, or he was almost 80 years old. And so that doesn't make sense. So the question thus becomes, why are we doing this? And I think the answer, to me, quite clearly is we're doing this because we can, and to show that we can. And to me, that doesn't seem to be a good reason to kill people. I had someone call me the other day the asshole abolitionist. And I'm not interested in people not being able to shit, but sorry, I couldn't resist. But my point, I think their point was that they get mad at me for speaking so bluntly about these situations. And I tell them, you can't have repentance without truth. You can't have reconciliation without truth. And so there has to be a real desire to tell the truth about what's going on in every single iteration and circumstances that are going on. And if someone has done horrific things, that needs to be said, but it doesn't mean that we have to respond horrifically.
Yeah.
So, Miranda, you got some more questions?
I have a couple left.
Go ahead, Miranda.
Go ahead.
Well, you obviously talked to a lot of people on death row. What's the most common emotion they face before they are sentenced to death or like go into that room? Is it fear? Is it anxiety? Or is it acceptance?
I think it's different every time. I don't know that I can say that there's one emotion or way of being. Most of my guys are in a position of they're ready for it to be over with. There's been all of these years of appeals and struggles, and you've got to think that it's not just that these executions are happening in southern states, the Bible Belt. It's that these folks are having to exist in some of the worst prisons in the country, if not the world. I mean, very, very difficult circumstances. I mean, I think I read yesterday that like over 80% of prisons in Florida don't have heating or air conditioning. I know, of course, there's going to be a lot of people out there that say, oh, you don't need no AC, you don't need no heat. That I can just hear it. But I guess these circumstances are so bad that they are just ready to be done.
Yeah.
And also, I think there's such an anxiety around what's coming that they're ready to face it. So I guess I can't speak to everyone. I can speak to myself in that I know that for me, I find myself often shaking a lot in the chamber, and it's because of the sadness, the fear, the pain, the last words, trying to remember everything. It's a level of trauma, of super added trauma. The courts have defined cruel and unusual punishment as something that adds super added pain. They use that phrase a lot, super added pain. And I would argue that the super added trauma of this is such a spectacle is made of it. It's terrifying. I mean, it's terrifying. It's traumatic. It's injurious. It's a lot of things. But I do hope that for every one of my guys, what they feel most of all is love. I hope that they feel there in the end that they are loved. And one of the last things they hear from someone apart from the executioners making announcements is me telling them that I love them. And that's very important to me because I think that we all deserve to hear that we are human, that we are loved, that we are valued, even in the midst of such horror.
Yeah. Do you think there's an alternative to the death penalty that proponents of it would be more open to accepting?
I think the argument for conservative folks is that life in prison is much more cruel than the death penalty. Knowing that you're never, ever going to leave those walls. I can tell you that there's a lot of my guys that feel very relieved. And I mean, I've had multiple guys volunteer, and they volunteer because they're tired of living on death row. And so, the idea that people feel like you have to kill people in order for them to be punished is absurd. I mean, I think there are plenty of other ways that people could be punished within our system that are much more horrific than the death penalty.
On the other hand, do you think the new wave of restorative justice and people who are leaning towards more rehabilitation is affecting the death penalty and how it's being carried out or how many people are being put on it?
Two thoughts on that question. One is that, the death penalty is declining at a rapid rate in that new death sentences are not being handed out at any rate close to what they have been in recent decades. The reason for that is because of these spaces of rehabilitation where we're learning more about violence and what triggers violence. We're learning more about development and psychology and all of these different pieces. And I think that is leading to more understanding and causing people to go, okay, I don't know that I'm comfortable with the death penalty in this circumstance. I also think that lawyers are getting to be better trained at how to produce or how to present those types of arguments, those types of mitigating arguments. There's a lot of people out here who don't want people to be rehabilitated. They want them to suffer and they want them to experience pain. And to me, it's sort of a catch-22. Like it's sort of like when I look at European prisons, I think to myself, damn, that's incredible. Like, look at all they're doing, and they got like concerts, and they got a 20-year maximum sentence, and there's all of these things going on. And then I start thinking about some of the folks that I've encountered on death row, and I start thinking, oh, shit, 20-year maximum sentence. I guess my point is that if rehabilitation works, then I'm all about rehabilitation. I think for a lot of people, it does work. What is that guy's name that was in Norway that killed all of those kids on the island?
Yeah,
What is it?
Remember his name, but who you're talking
Lars
about.
or something like that. What they've done with him is he's reached the maximum sentence and he has gone into a treatment. And so they keep him in a treatment facility. And to me, that seems a lot different. I think I could get down with that. But this whole idea of let's just let everybody out and abolish all prisons, I don't know, I can't handle it. But Miranda, back to your question. I think that most of the people that I work with that have been on death row longer than, 5-10 years have experienced tremendous rehabilitation. And there are a lot that I think could be very functional members of society. But we should be able to decide that on a case-by-case basis. We shouldn't just be rushing to kill everyone.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. And the last thing I want to ask you is Krista Pike now. She has got a death sentence date of this year on 30 September. Have you had any experience with her or talked to her?
I do know her, not well, but she's got a religious liberty claim going right now that is sort of interesting. I think she's Buddhist, but she's making a claim that the execution process interferes with her ability to practice her religion. And very interesting, strong argument. But Krista was able to really fight back and filed a lawsuit, won a lawsuit, reached a settlement. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I know one of the cases that was really powerful for me was Kelly Gissendanner in Georgia. She was executed probably about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more. She had killed her husband, and there was a real argument as to whether or not she should be executed. And her kids came out very strongly advocating for her not to be executed. And I think one of the things that women on death row present a very interesting circumstance when it comes to dates actually coming is because people are forced to reckon with all of these sort of misogynistic and patriarchal questions and prejudices, because it's not just, this is a crazy woman that's on death row. It's, oh my gosh, maybe she looks like my aunt, or maybe she looks like my mom, or, there's more of a visceral connection when you actually have to see this person. I don't know if y'all remember Carla Faye Tucker back in the 90s in Texas. She had gotten saved and she became this big evangelical poster child, and Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell were advocating for her. It was a really wild circumstance for all of these super evangelical conservative leaders to be advocating for somebody on death row. And it was this major moment because George W. Bush was running for president, was the governor of Texas at the same time, and he didn't save her. And there was this big anger that came out from the evangelical crowd. And it was fascinating because it was like, where the hell have y'all been on all these other executions, these hundreds of people being executed? But I think, interestingly enough, I think women do tend to bring out something in the populace that makes them feel or seem a little closer to an execution, if that makes sense. I've got another woman that I work with in Arizona, Shauna Ford, and there's 3 women on death row out there. But Shauna is another really interesting circumstance in that, do you remember the Minutemen, the people that patrolled the border?
She was one of those, and they allegedly killed
a family, man and his daughter. She's, we're actually really close. She's a friend, but it's just fascinating. And I think part of the reason why she has been treated as harshly as she has been is that she's very boisterous, she comes on very strong, I guess is the best way of saying it. And I think there's a lot of people out there that would say a woman is not supposed to act like that. I think that's been part of her issue. I think conservatives thought that she had embarrassed them she had undercut some of their arguments. I think that's another thing that they thought or whatever.
We really appreciate you being on the show.
I've got a new book coming out. It's supposed to go out on Amazon, I think at the end of the week. It's this kind of, I think y'all will really appreciate it. It's a big one. It's 415, 20 pages, but it's this history and engagement with nitrogen executions. And so I go through like how they came about, how they started. I engage like the mass manufacturer and what that looks like. And then I do like narratives of all 8 that have happened, including personal narratives of the 2 that I was there for. And then I engage all the judicial decisions and how this came about. And I think something that will be particularly interesting to your colleagues and to your students is the judicial rulings and basically how this sort of came about, in that Judge Huffaker, one of the federal district judges in Alabama, basically said, I can't tell you can't do this because I haven't seen it. And therefore, if I haven't seen it, I can't, I can't call it cruel and unusual punishment because I haven't seen it. And so that was really sort of the start of nitrogen executions. Is basically, it was an experiment, and basically the judge said, I can't stop it because it's an experiment.
There you go.
But sort of makes you wonder, like, if they come up with, like, putting a stick of dynamite up someone's ass and making them explode, like, is that going to fit that same logic? I don't know. But I will definitely mail y'all a book. So bye,
Take
y'all.
care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Criminology Chats is brought to you by the Chicago School. For more information about the institution, please visit www.thechicagoschool.edu. That's www.thechicagoschool.edu. I would like to extend my gratitude to the students who always participate in these episodes. We want to hear from our listeners, so please email us at criminologychatspodcast@gmail.com. That's CRIMINOLGYCSPODCAST@gmail.com. And also, please check out our YouTube channel at https://www.youtube.com/@Criminology Chats Podcast. This podcast is produced and edited by A.M. Peters with additional post-production services provided by Audio Photo Synthesis. I'm J.R. Rainbolt, and I eagerly anticipate you listening to our next episode.
Be safe out there.
The views and perspectives shared in these recordings are intended solely for informational purposes and do not reflect the official stance or policies of the speakers of the Chicago School. Any commercial products and manufacturers mentioned are included for informational reasons only and do not imply endorsement or approval by the speakers of the Chicago School.